children between them. And we asked both leaders, what happens if your 10 children have 10 children? And the answer was, alas, Allah will provide. Allah will not provide, though. And Yemen, which does not have the energy resources to desalinate, does not have the money, and all the water would have to be pumped uphill to Sana'a, faces a huge, huge challenge. Now, one of the things I learned to do really on this trip in all these countries is always ask yourself the question, what is happening to the apex predator? What is happening to the top of the food chain? It's often very, very indicative of what's happening to the environment. So in Yemen, the apex predator is the Arabian leopard. And of course, it will come as no surprise to you that the Arabian leopard is going extinct. And I wanted to explore this part of the story, so we tracked down, it turns out there is an Arabian leopard protection society in Yemen, headed by an American high school teacher. And there is, in the Sana'a Zoo, yes, there is a Sana'a Zoo, an Arabian leopard exhibit with 2 captive Arabian leopards, which we went there and we filmed outside the cage as the leopards walked back and forth behind us. The head of the Arabian Leopard Society explained to me that when he started the Arabian Leopard Society, Protection Society, people came to him and said, why are you trying to preserve these predators? All our leaders are predators. What happened to the Arabian leopard is very much what happened to a generation of predatory Arab leaders. They ate it all. They ate it all and there's nothing left. In the case of Yemen, what happened to the leopard is really the whole story of Yemen. All the men left the country, not all, but many of them, to build the Persian Gulf, to build Riyadh and Qatar and Kuwait and Dubai. While they were gone, the women, in desperation, basically deforested all the hillsides. The hillsides are naked now in many places. As a result, the ecosystem where the plants and animals that the Arabian leopard depended on for its survival, the antelope, rabbits, other small animals, they all died off. They lost their ecosystem. And so, of course, that's what happened to the apex predator as well. Yemen has the potential to be the first country in the world to run out of water. It is no accident that Al-Qaeda has taken root in just that country. Syria, you cannot understand what happened in Syria unless you understand that between 2006 and 2010, Syria experienced the worst drought in its recorded history. That is the whole precursor to the revolution there. The drought did not cause the revolution, but it created such dry tinder there that when the revolution came, millions of people were so much more eager to join. Now, our documentary in Syria took us first to the Turkish border where we interviewed Syrian climate refugees who are from the Deir Zur area in the north, Hasakah Raqqa province, who basically had fled to Turkey. We interviewed a farm family, and the story was very clear. They were living on their farm. The drought came. 1 year, 2 years, they couldn't survive. They, along with roughly 1 million Syrians, left the countryside, farmers and herders, and went primarily to Aleppo, Damascus, and the small satellite cities around them. The government did nothing for them. Assad was actually taking care of some huge farming families in central Syria, looking after them and their needs, allowing them to pump with diesel engines vast amounts of water for their giant farms, lowering the water table, leading to massive, influx of salination. And you basically had 1 million Syrian climate refugees meeting 1 million refugees from Iraq in all the major Syrian cities. And as this Syrian woman, who was the center of our story, told us, as she put it, with the first call of Allahu Akbar, with the first call of Allahu Akbar, we joined the revolution. These were not revolutionary people. These were farmers and herders. But with the first call of Allahu Akbar, given what Assad did to them, or I should say, did not do for them, they joined the revolution. I learned the Arabic word for drought, jafaf, so well because I heard it so many times in northern Syria. It is a drought environment story. Now think of this. The Syrian government could not deal with a prolonged drought when you had a Syrian government. What happens if another drought comes along and the Syrian government has destroyed much of its basic infrastructure? The Americans will help, the Russians will help. We just spent $60 billion cleaning up one superstorm, Sandy. So this is a completely different geopolitical environment, a world of disorder that Israel is going to have on a 360-degree axis. Last place we went to was Egypt. We did 2 stories there. We did the bleaching of the coral in the Red Sea. We went diving there. The Red Sea has experienced sharp temperature rise in the last couple of years. We're seeing the beginning of bleaching, which is threatening the whole basic tourism industry and fishing industry there. And the environmental community in the Red Sea has done an amazing job trying to basically preserve the ecosystem there and create a partnership with the hotel owners, with the fishermen, and with the government. In fact, the Egyptian government has basically outsourced preservation of the Red Sea to Hergada, which is basically the Red Sea Environmental Trust, which went around and basically tried to explain to the fishermen that a dead shark was worth about $150 in meat, and a live shark, a lot of European tourists come to the Red Sea to swim with the sharks, which you can do there, was worth over $100,000 over its lifetime in hotel rooms, travel, restaurant, and whatnot. They built an amazing ecosystem down there on their own to preserve it. In Cairo, we did the bread story. As you'll recall, the original Tahrir revolutionary call was bread, freedom, and dignity. And the reason bread was in there was because in 2010, Russia had experienced wildfires, China experienced drought, and Australia experienced flood, and we experienced drought in Kansas, and the result was a global wheat shortage. In December 2010, the month that Tunisia went up in flames, world food prices hit their all-time record high. What happened in Egypt, basically, was every loaf of pita at government bakeries is supposed to be sold for 5 piastres. And what the bakers did, and we actually filmed one of them doing this, they get their allotment of official government wheat, which they're supposed to sell for 5 piastres. They'll sell a few bags of that if you line up at 5:30 in the morning, as we watch people do, and the rest went out the back door to private bakers who would then sell it for 35 piastres a loaf, 7 times the government price. And that mobilized a huge number of poor people against Mubarak. Again, was wheat, was climate, was water the reason for the Arab Spring? No, it was not, but it was a huge underlying stressor which basically mobilized millions of people against these regimes who could not deliver the basics. So let me just close by making 3 points that I took away from this. The first is that as part of the documentary, we actually went out to Kansas and visited Wes Jackson, Salina, Kansas. It runs an experimental wheat farm. And Wes Jackson is a MacArthur Genius Award winner whose goal is to invent a perennial form of wheat that can actually be grown in the prairie without any tilling, fertilizing, etc. They've actually got a strand called Kernza, where they're already actually experimenting with this and had some success. And Wes is an amazing guy. He's been profiled all over the place. And one day he was giving me a lecture on on the history of the prairie. And it was a huge lesson, because I'm a big believer in watching the parallels. What goes on in nature can have some real parallels in the life and organization of human societies. So Wes explained to me that basically the prairie is a polyculture. It actually naturally fertilized itself. It naturally pesticided itself. And what we, the European settlers, did when we came to America is we wiped out the polyculture of the prairie, and we planted monocultures. Monocultures of wheat, corn, and sorghum, and monocultures that in order to survive required an enormous number of high-density fossil fuels. High-density fossil fuels to make fertilizer, pesticides, and to power tractors. Now, monocultures, as Wes was explaining to me, are enormously susceptible to disease. And of course, what happened was that when the Dust Bowl came, it was very interesting. The prairie all survived, but the monoculture crops all died. And he was explaining all this to me, and I said, Wes, isn't that interesting? Because what Al-Qaeda is trying to do is use high-density fossil fuels, donations from Persian Gulf countries and charities, to wipe out the polyculture of the Arab Muslim world, what is their call to purify the Arabian Peninsula, and install a monoculture. And of course, when was the Arab Muslim world at its absolute height and power? Between the 8th and 13th century, when it was the world's greatest polyculture. And then while I was on a roll, I said, you know, isn't it interesting, the Tea Party in America is using high-density fossil fuels from the Koch brothers and all the oil companies in an effort to wipe out the polyculture of the Republican Party and impose a monoculture. And of course, the Republican Party at its height was an amazing polyculture. After all, it was Teddy Roosevelt who gave us our national park system. It was Richard Nixon who invented the Environmental Protection Agency and gave us the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. It was George H.W. Bush who invented cap and trade. It was even George Bush Jr. who gave us the whole initiative on AIDS in the Middle East and No Child Left Behind. The Republican Party at its height was a polyculture, and polycultures are naturally resilient. Monocultures are enormously susceptible to disease and diseased ideas. I will let all you do the analogy for Israel. Let me just say what I said I ultimately learned from this trip, which is that talked to a lot of Arabs today in the Arab world, and in a place like Egypt, they will bemoan the fact that we've tried everything. We've tried everything. We tried Nasserism, socialism, communism, Islamism, liberalism. Nothing worked. And my answer to them, there's one ism you haven't tried, and it's the only one that'll save you today, and that is environmentalism. Because environmentalists start with the commons. They start first by understanding, unless you protect the commons, there is no Shiite commons or Sunni commons, there's no Israeli commons or Palestinian commons, there is just the commons. And if you don't collaborate to protect the commons, nothing will save you, because Mother Nature, my friend and teacher Rob Watson, inventor of green buildings, taught me this. Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. She doesn't care what religion you are. She doesn't care what church or mosque you pray to. She will do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And to put it in American baseball terms, Mother Nature always bats last. And she always bats 1,000. Do not mess with Mother Nature. And that's exactly what we are doing. Hence, I'll only tell you what I say to my own fellow Americans. And it really was a subtext of the conversation here I saw today. I'm a huge believer, as a journalist, that to name something is to own it. If you can name an issue, you can own the issue. Whether you're talking about peace in the Middle East, or surrender, whether you're talking about the world is flat. So I do a lot of work. I try to name things. And one of the problems with green is that the people who named it all these years, the people who owned the definition were actually the people who hated it. And they named it liberal, girly man, sissy, unpatriotic, vaguely French. Vaguely French. Mr. Gore, you're looking a little French. Well, I'm here to tell you green is geopolitical, geostrategic, capitalistic, patriotic. Green is the new red, white, and blue, white and blue, and green, black, red, and white. Thank you very much.